here. We want to thank David for coming, David Turk from DOE. And we have Wally Ademo. He'll be with us virtually. He's unfortunately he has COVID, but he's still able to participate, and we really appreciate his efforts of doing that. It's going to be very helpful for all of us. We're here to talk about a familiar subject to members on this committee, the electric vehicle supply chain. Before we begin, I want to start again by thanking all of those who are participating, all those who made this possible. I appreciate Wally again. I hope you're feeling better and that you're back in operation soon. I know you will. And to David Turk again, the DOE Treasury, they have important responsibilities implementing the laws passed by Congress to secure the EV supply chain. We should all be concerned when an administration tries to implement a law that Congress didn't pass. And when it comes to EVs, this administration is implementing the Build Back Better approach they wanted, not the Inflation Reduction Act that we passed. The Inflation Reduction Act had three purposes: reduce our debt, secure our energy, and produce cleaner in America than anywhere else, and bring back manufacturing of the building blocks that run our country and made us the superpower of the world. While some may believe I just have a vendetta, which I don't, against EVs, I don't own an EV, I don't intend on buying an EV, but I think they're a wonderful vehicle. I just think that we got way ahead of our skis on this. The transportation sector is responsible for 29% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the country, more than any other sector, with light-duty vehicles making up 58% of those emissions. Globally, transportation makes up about 15% of total greenhouse gas emissions. Alternative fueled vehicle technologies like EVs, hydrogen vehicles, and hybrids can play an important role in lowering these emissions while providing an opportunity for the United States to maintain our status as an automotive powerhouse, which we have always been, reshore our manufacturing base, which we've let go, and create good-paying jobs, which we all need. My problem is not with EVs. My problem is with my administration's crusade to convert everyone over to an EV, regardless of where the battery came from or what the law actually says. The United States is the birthplace of Henry Ford and the revolutionary Model T. Vehicle manufacturing is a building block of our great nation. There has never been a time when we couldn't produce the engines, transmissions, axles, and every other essential component of a car. I remember waiting in line for oil in the 1970s to go to work because of OPEC. And I'll be damned if I'm going to have to wait for a battery from China. Just like the Putin weaponized Russians' oil and gas resources to try to scare off Europe from supporting Ukraine, Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party are more than willing to use EV batteries and the critical minerals inside them as leverage to put Americans and the free world at risk. China has already started to do so with recently announced export controls to certain critical minerals. China has truly cornered the market on EVs and is responsible for 74% of the world's cathode production, 92% of the anode production, that's the positive and negative of a battery, and 76% of the lithium-ion battery production. They control anywhere from 60 to 100% of minerals processing, depending on the mineral. But it doesn't have to be that way. America and the free trade agreement partners have the capacity to produce this for ourselves. For example, our free trade agreement partners combined are mining more lithium, nickel, and cobalt than China. And 20 to 40% of global processing capacity for these minerals belong to either a U.S. ally, one of our FTA partners, or exist in our own country. And that's before we develop the mining and processing facilities in the queue. Figures like these show why correct implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law is so vital, coupled with comprehensive and common sense permitting reform. These bills were carefully designed to help us win back our vehicle supply chains and create new domestic jobs. Unfortunately, it seems that the administration is so hell-bent on implementing the radical climate agenda quicker than what needs to be for the political gain that they are willing to bend and break a law and watch our manufacturing base continue to fall behind. What I'm saying here is nothing I haven't said to the president on down the food chain. I think we have a respectful disagreement on how it's being implemented. We should all be proud of the bill that we have, this most transformative. The IRA is the most transformative bill that we've ever done in my lifetime. So let me give you some examples. First, in proposed guidance, the administration has cut the IRA critical mineral sourcing percentage requirements in half, which is blatant violation of the numbers in Congress wrote directly into the law. These were written into the law. That's in the bill. This is what they're operating on, half of that. They're just operating on half of it. which we should be expediting all of our efforts and trying to make sure that we hit these numbers versus receding back to these numbers, and depending on foreign supply chains. They're also pretending that battery component manufacturing is the same as critical mineral processing. Extraction and processing is different than basically manufacturing. And it's very stated in the bill, manufacturing has to be done in North America to get to 3750. They are proposing fake critical minerals free trade agreements. Indonesia is controlled by China. You can't make that up. You can't think that Indonesia is going to be a free trade agreement country. They don't have control of it. These are the things that we're talking about, and we're hoping that we'll all come back to our senses. Democrats and Republicans working together on this to get back to what the bill was intended to do. And most recently, with the proposed rules on foreign entities of concern, the administration is delaying deadlines we wrote into the IRA to remove China completely from the battery supply chain. If we don't do it quicker than later, it's going to be something we will be dependent on for a long time. As shown in the chart behind me, under the weakened foreign entity of concern rules, vehicles that contain battery minerals and components from China and other adversaries can qualify for years longer than laws allow. This is in the bill. 2024, deadline for Inflation Reduction Act. No extraction, processing critical minerals by Chinese entities or other foreign entities of concern. December 24. This is back. They now have written into their proposed rules December 30, 2026 or later. This is in no battery manufacturing Chinese entities or foreign entities of concern. That was supposed to be December 31st, 23, which gave them a year. Now they're 26 or later. Certain anode and cathode components, who knows? That's all temporary rules. You can't operate that long on temporary rules because they weren't designed for that. The Biden administration didn't write the bill, and quite frankly, it seems like some of the people implementing the law haven't really read it or understand what our intentions were. The tax code Congress writes isn't a set of voluntary guidelines, but happens to be how some administration are treating it. And the EV credit is just one of several concerning examples. If the administration doesn't correct course and implement the IRA programs the way that we wrote them, their unlawful rules are bound to get struck down in court, which will create tremendous uncertainty for both automakers and consumers and all the investments that are coming to all of our states. Every one of us are benefiting by this bill. I will support any entity that goes to court to correct the illegal liberalization of this law with an amicus brief to set the record straight on the bill Congress actually wrote. And it won't be too hard to basically support it because it's just plain as can read, as you read on that. It's in the bill. I'm willing to go and do whatever it takes to make sure that we get back on track. Now, let me be clear. Just because the administration has broken a lot of the laws implementing the certain aspects of the IRA, it does not change how proud that we all should be of the law that we actually passed. There's no question the IRA is doing what we hoped it would do in many respects, and it will do so much more if this administration follows the law of the land. The IRA raised $687 billion in revenue, invested $384 billion in energy security while also improving our environment, invested another $64 billion in health care, and with the balance, we paid down $239 billion of debt. These are things you never hear. These are things that you never hear anybody talk about. Today, we're producing more energy than ever before in America. You don't hear anybody bragging about that. We've been more independent today than we ever have been in the history of the United States. 37 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, 4.7 billion barrels of oil, record amounts of solar power, and battery storage, and we're continuing to innovate to make our energy even cleaner. We're transitioning the proper way by not giving up anything of our energy dominance. That's what makes us a superpower of the world. The IRA is bringing more investments to this country than ever before, and it's happening in states all across the nation. Red and blue states, I don't understand red and blue states, I just understand American states, but we're all benefiting from it, no matter what your political preference is. And DOE will play a critical role in supporting all of this with programs that provide financial assistance for battery materials, processing, manufacturing, and recycling projects in the United States, and loans and loan guarantees for every part of the EV supply, from mining to manufacturing, through the Loan Programs Office. In fact, electric vehicles and battery makers announced $52 billion in investments in North American supply chains before the administration started loosening these rules. That was before, based on how the bill was written. But if they keep bending the rules, we're going to lose the momentum that we cannot afford to let happen. Mr. Turk and Mr. Dima, Let me just end by thanking you both again for appearing here today to kind of correct and help us through this. You've always taken the time to hear me out on these issues. And while we have different perspectives, I have the utmost respect for both of you. I look forward to a constructive conversation today about how we can achieve a more reliable supply chain for the American EVs. And with that, I'll turn to Ranking Member Senator Barrasso for his comments.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing on federal subsidies for electric cars. These government handouts are the centerpiece of the disastrous so-called Inflation Reduction Act. Just about everything that President Joe Biden claimed about the IRA is false. And, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy that you showed those signs, which point out the lawlessness of the Biden administration when it comes to the law. What the IRA really stands for, to me, is irresponsible, reckless, and alarming. So let's start with the cost. According to Goldman Sachs analysis, the electric car subsidies in the IRA will cost an estimated $393 billion. That analysis is 28 times more than what the Congressional Budget Office estimated. Our national debt is now $34 trillion, and thanks to the IRA, we're about to spend hundreds of billions of dollars that we don't have to subsidize electric cars that the great majority of Americans do not want. This is especially true in Wyoming, where electric cars simply cannot compete with conventional vehicles. The fact is, electric car subsidies go primarily to the state of California, where nearly 40% of all electric cars in America are being sold. So hardworking families in my home state of Wyoming and the chairman's home state of West Virginia and other states represented significantly by members of this committee really are getting stuck subsidizing wealthy people from California. The IRA is a shakedown. It's also becoming very clear that President Biden hasn't thought through the consequences of his so-called energy transition. His efforts to force-feed American electric cars is going to cause greater instability in our nation's electric system. There's a group we refer to as NERC. It's the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. It has warned of increased risks from the premature closure of coal and natural gas power plants. The Biden administration does not seem to care. The Biden administration is working to shut down even more of these power plants while promoting a huge new source of demand on the grid, which is, of course, electric cars. Just consider that fully charging a single electric car consumes the same amount of electricity needed to power an entire house during times of peak demand. Does the president have any clue that his math is not working? No one really believes that 2/3 of the new cars sold in America in 2032 are going to be electric. The Biden administration's fixation on these electric cars amounts to wishful thinking on his part. But despite generous subsidies, the demand for electric cars is stagnating. Car dealers are opting out of selling them and opting out of servicing them. Compared to owners of conventional cars, owners of electric cars are paying higher repair costs, higher insurance rates, and by the way, they are getting less resale value. And the headline today, Mr. Chairman, and I ask unanimous consent to put this in the record, is from Bloomberg. We talk about resale values. Hertz reports today they are going to sell 20,000 EVs in its shift back to gas-powered cars. So much for the Biden economy.
Without objection.
So the first paragraph of this, Hertz Global Holdings plans to sell a third of its U.S. electric vehicle fleet and reinvest in gas-powered cars, they say, due to weak demand and high repair costs for its battery-powered options. Well, the American public is seeing exactly the same thing, and they're getting hit with similar bills. The damage that the IRA will do to America's automotive sector is potentially catastrophic. First 9 months of 2023, Ford Motor Company alone lost $3.1 billion on electric cars. Losses like that can't go on for long. Perhaps worst of all, the IRA plays right into the hands of the Chinese and other foreign companies. You've heard the expression, follow the money. Well, if you want to follow the IRA money, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, you're going to need a passport because the money is going all over the world. Mr. Chairman, as you have repeatedly pointed out, the Biden administration has allowed electric car subsidies to flow to foreign companies in countries that are hostile to American interests. Recently, the Chinese carmaker BYD topped Tesla as the world's largest electric car manufacturer. In Europe, that company outsold Tesla in the last quarter of 2023. BYD's goal is to be the biggest electric car manufacturer in Europe by the year 2030. The administration has said it welcomes Chinese companies as big players, the administration says, in renewable and electric car markets. This is a terrible mistake. The IRA will push us away from the fuels and technologies where America has the lead and push us toward the minerals and technologies that are currently controlled by China. We need to change course. President Biden wants to subsidize and regulate our way to greater energy security and lower emissions. He wants to force the nation to adopt a single technology that only works in certain zip codes. This is a recipe for failure. We need to return to the pro-America, all-of-the-above energy strategy. We also need a comparable all-of-the-above vehicle strategy, a strategy that includes more efficient internal combustion engines, hydrogen fuel cells, compressed natural gas, and hybrid vehicles. These are technologies that can increase consumer choice while also reducing emissions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. One high note. The bill prevented any Chinese cars from getting any credits in the United States. We did that.
Our enemies are getting the money.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And as chair of the Senate Finance Committee, which has jurisdiction over the climate tax credits like the new clean vehicle credit, I'm glad that we are continuing what we began in early summer of 2021. You and I remember the history, invited me and Senator Murkowski to come to West Virginia, and we began the efforts to get it right. And I want to make sure that some key points really get out that address the heart of what we did. Our colleague from Wyoming, my friend and neighbor, Senator Barrasso, said something about all of the above. Well, starting in 2012, Senator Manchin and I began the effort to build the foundation of our energy policy on what Senator Manchin and I called technological neutrality, which was one better, colleagues, because it ensured the competitiveness of our energy system while at the same time giving everybody a chance to be inventive and creative, because nobody knew what the big energy sources would be 20 years down the road. And then Senator Manchin and I, because I remember the expression on his face when I asked him about technological neutrality, because we hadn't really gotten into that early in 2012, I said, the other thing we need to do is to say, the more you reduce carbon, the bigger your tax savings. And Senator Manchin swallowed hard and said, yeah, does that include carbon capture and nuclear and the like? And I said, you darn right it does. So I want it understood that that was the foundation of what actually became law. Market-oriented, no mandates, private sector, and we were still focused on climate. Now, let me just make a couple of quick points on EVs. The issue with respect to EVs, Senator Manchin and I realized back then it was going to be an issue of climate, jobs, and matters like supply chains. And what we have sought to do with Secretary Adeyemo, and we've worked, I think, in a very constructive kind of way, is we've been able to show that climate, jobs, and secure supply chains, they're not mutually exclusive. Smart policies can get you progress in all three areas. And working with Mr. Adeyemo, I think we have achieved that. Now, we understand, and the chairman is talking about this, we have continued work to do to make sure in the relationship between the Department of Energy and Treasury that we continue to make progress. We are committed to doing that. But the fact is we are making progress. The automakers already are making changes in the supply chains, making sure that we're getting real improvement. We're seeing build-out of charging stations and progress there. So we're going to continue in the spirit of what we did in 2012 when we said technological neutrality, folks. It's an improvement on even all of the above because it's more science-oriented, creates incentives for everybody to see in a federal system. So this is an exciting bit of progress that we're discussing. Senator Manchin made mention of some of the announcements, over $150 billion of investment in electric vehicles and batteries. Big economic win. We got more to do, and I look forward to working with my colleagues. And I also note that Senator Barrasso is a valuable member of the Finance Committee, and we'll be able to continue those discussions.
Senator Barrasso.
Just, Mr. Chairman, the comment that you made about the IRA not allowing tax credits for Chinese electric vehicle purchases. But the IRA, and this will be part of my questioning today, does allow leased Chinese electric vehicles to qualify, and to me, this is a massive loophole.
I agree with you 1,000%, and that's what we're trying to stop. So with that, we have turned to our witnesses now for their opening remarks. We have the Honorable David Turk, Deputy Secretary of Energy, and we have the Honorable Wally Adeyemo, a friend to all of us that we know very well and work very close to, Department of Treasury. So we'll start with David Turk.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, Chairman Wyden, other members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be with you all today. For decades, the United States has sat idle while our global competitors have taken control of critical supply chains. Chairman, you raised some numbers. I'll share a few other numbers here as we begin the discussions. China currently processes, and I really want to underscore processing, the processing stranglehold that China has right now, 65% of the world's lithium and cobalt. It's 100% when you look at graphite that China processes right now. Now, thanks to President Biden and the landmark bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, and I want to give a particular thanks to this committee, the chairman in particular, but this whole committee for your leadership on those historic pieces of legislation. We're fighting back. Chairman, you mentioned the IRA as the most transformative bill. I would say the bill and the IRA together, the most transformative bill we've ever had in our country when it comes to supply chains, diversifying, increasing the reliability and the resilience of those supply chains. Already, we've made multi-billion-dollar grant cost-share investments in battery manufacturing all across our country. $16 billion of conditional commitments through our loan program at the Department of Energy, and powerful tax incentives are just starting to kick in. And these tools you have given us are working. Since President Biden took office, we've leveraged over $157 billion in private investments in the EV supply chain. $157 billion of private investments so far. Over 340 new or expanded facilities, again, all across our country, and 136,000 estimated new direct jobs. And that's just the direct jobs from this investment. There's an additional hundreds of thousands of indirect jobs because of this investment in this strategy. Domestic EV sales have quadrupled since President Biden took office. If you look at the 2022 numbers and compare that to 2023, we've had a 50% increase in our electric vehicle sales in our country. Ranking Member Barrasso, you spoke about affordability. We now have models, including the Chevy Bolt, that's under $20,000 in an EV, a full EV version. I asked the team to take a look at existing gas prices and electricity prices and what's the difference in terms of how you fuel up, whether you fuel up an internal combustion or an EV. Right now, the average across our country is $46 to fuel up if you've got an internal combustion engine. That number is $15. $15 if you charge up at home, the average across our country. And thanks just to the investments we've been able to make so far with these historic pieces of legislation, domestic lithium production in our country is expected to increase 13-fold by 2030. Domestic graphite production will increase 25-fold. And those are the results for the investments we've only made so far. There's so much more to come. Let me spend a few minutes sharing what this targeted strategic industrial strategy means for 3 specific communities, all of which are receiving DOE support. First, St. Gabriel, Louisiana. Cora is a company that opened a fluorochemical plant in St. Gabriel in 1991. In October 2022, they announced expansion to produce lithium hexafluoride phosphate. Every EV battery needs this. China currently dominates the market. U.S. produces 0 right now. Cora will be the first U.S. American manufacturer. They received $100 million in a grant from DOE, again, a cost share that's leveraging twice, 3 times the amount on the private sector side. And St. Gabriel will have 80 new jobs because of this strategy, because of this investment. Second, St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis has been a leader in phosphates for nearly 150 years. In August last year, ICL broke ground on a $400 million battery manufacturing plant, producing enough cathode active materials for 1.3 million EVs. $197 million in DOE investments, leading to 150 new jobs in the St. Louis community. And third, Weirton, West Virginia. As our chairman knows, a former steel town was once the 5th largest steel producer in our country. Unfortunately, that plant closed down 20 years ago, and a third of the population moved away. Thanks to this historic legislation, thanks to the chairman's leadership with this historic pieces of legislation, in November, Boston Metal was selected for $50 million in a grant to manufacture critical materials for fuel cells, translating to 200 new jobs in Weirton. And Form Energy broke ground last year on a $760 million iron-air battery manufacturing plant that will create an additional 700 jobs for that community. And we're only getting started. Let me conclude by again thanking this committee for your leadership in giving us these historic tools. And thank you for your continued partnership as we use all these tools to improve the resilience and reliability of our supply chains, to accelerate our clean energy progress, to support hundreds of thousands of family-supporting jobs all across our country, and for revitalizing our communities. We look forward to seizing all these opportunities together. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Manchin and Wyden, I should say, and ranking member and members of the committee, thank you for having me today. I look forward to discussing Treasury's efforts to implement recently passed legislation in ways that help American companies build an effective supply chain to support our transition to a clean energy economy and improving our energy security. The Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act jump-started the United States' ability to compete in the global market for electric vehicles. As you know, the People's Republic of China has over a decade pursued a non-market policies and practices to further state-led industries, targeting and channeled enormous amounts of financial support into the development of an EV sector, seeking to help Chinese firms establish a dominant position in the global EV marketplace. China's targeted government intervention and investment in clean energy totaled over $500 billion just in 2022, nearly 4 times the investment in the U.S. and more than 1.5 times the U.S. and European Union investment combined. Today, China produces over half the world's EVs and even a larger share of EV batteries. Critical minerals, as you all know, have been central to China's EV sector development strategy. While China is ahead of us on EVs today, by enacting the IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure package, you have given the United States the ability to not only compete, but to lead on effort to build an alternative global supply chain. Of course, because our domestic system is different than China's, our path to building a resilient domestic EV production base is also going to be different. Instead of directing industries, the IRA and Bipartisan Infrastructure Act provide incentives to support the private sector in building the EV ecosystem, from manufacturing and procurement to adoption and charging. Importantly, these incentives foster competition in our economy. Because of the IRA and Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, America's manufacturers are responding. It's why we've seen manufacturing investment for clean vehicles, batteries, and critical minerals double since enactment of these packages. American workers across the country are witnessing firsthand the new economic opportunities. Since the passage of the IRA, we've seen $157 billion in private sector investment announcements around EVs and batteries here in the United States. Investments in communities all over the country, not just on the West Coast or the East Coast, the middle of the country, in the South, across America. We've seen these investments. Investments related to clean energy are being made disproportionately in communities with historically lower wages, lower college graduation rates, and higher rates of poverty. An important distinction between our strategy and China's is that we are not undertaking this transition alone. While our investments benefit American manufacturers, workers, and consumers, we recognize that for this project to be successful, we need our allies to help build resilient supply chains that improve our energy security. That's why our early efforts to build critical mineral agreements have centered on allies with whom we share values and national security interest. We know too well the impact that Russia's weaponization of natural gas has had on Ukraine and on crude oil markets and the price at the pump here in the United States. While gas prices have fallen 35% since the peak in 2022, over the long term, it's clear that we need to improve our energy security with clean energy. And we cannot afford for our allies to go from being overly reliant on Russia for natural gas to being reliant on China for batteries. In both instances, we're left vulnerable to weaponization of trade as a geopolitical tool. That's why building our EV supply chain is critical to our energy security. It won't happen overnight, as you all know, but the investments that have been made in recent months and years will pay dividends for decades to come. In time, these investments will transform into the domestic supply chain that will power numerous electric vehicle models expected over the next decades. A main beneficiary of these investments is the American worker. Manufacturers have already announced nearly 200,000 direct EV-related jobs in the United States over the past 8 years. The recently announced EV and electric vehicle battery manufacturing investments are expected to create more than 800,000 additional jobs in the broader economy. We expect growth in manufacturing, construction, engineering, and electrical work, and more. These well-paying jobs will bring new economic opportunities to communities across the country. And as such, the clean energy transition will benefit American consumers, workers, and communities. In the year ahead, Treasury plans to continue its work to support building out the EV supply chain in a way that benefits American companies, workers, and consumers, while also collaborating with our allies. I look forward to discussing the details on how we will do this today with you, and look forward to continuing our partnership with the Department of Energy and our partners in the interagency. Thank you.
And now we're going to start a question. I'll begin. You want a quick question? You have a quick question?
If that be all right, I know
Yeah, I
that
know you have to go to committee, right?
we're working on this tax agreement, my
Go ahead, ask your
Republican
question.
colleagues. Thanks so much. I have just one, and I want to thank the chairman and Senator Heinrich on this. Mr. Secretary, it's been a pleasure to work with you and Mr. Turk. We've seen the major automakers already making changes in their supply chains to ensure vehicles qualify for the new clean vehicle tax credit. And this, in our view, is in response to the requirements, the supply chain requirements that were in the IRA. My one question to you is, can you tell us how Treasury's rules help to implement the statute's provision here so that we can make sure that the new clean vehicle tax credit helps us with supply chains, helps us with climate, helps us with jobs? How do the rules you're working on help to implement the statute that we wrote? Secretary.
Well, Senator, thank you for the question, and thank you for your leadership in drafting the IRA. What we've seen in our conversations with automakers is that they feel as if the standards set in the IRA in terms of clean vehicles and the 30D standards are tough. And that's why we've seen, as we introduced the foreign entity of concern rule, that it went from over 40 cars being eligible to only 13. But what the automakers have also said is that they are achievable standards that we can use to make sure that they're domesticating the supply chain. And by making sure that any car that receives the 30D credit has to be built here in North America, it means that it is going to be built within our economy. We're building supply chain here. And in addition to 30D, 45X, and a number of the other credits will mean that not only are the cars built here, but the batteries will also be built here in America using American innovation and ingenuity. American workers, American manufacturing has led the world for decades. And because of the way that you designed the IRA, it's put us in a position where we create incentives both for American consumers who want to buy EVs, but also for American manufacturers, including auto manufacturers, to be able to compete with China by lowering the cost of the supply chain that they will need to do so. Over the last year alone, these automakers have talked about the work that they're doing to bring that supply chain back to America and to our FTA partners. And because of the work that we're doing alongside our colleagues at the Department of Energy, we're making that easier every day.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll get back to regular schedule here. Mr. Audiemo, I'm deeply concerned that Treasury is allowing taxpayers to claim Inflation Reduction Act credits in the current tax year based on proposed rules and not final rules. I cannot think of any other federal agency that operates this way, and here's my comparison. If FERC proposes a policy change, or EPA proposes a regulation, or DOE proposes a grant program, only once the proposal is final does it actually come into effect. So do you agree it's abnormal to rely on proposed rules for programs that are already in effect, like the IRA tax credits? And is Treasury using proposed rules trying to avoid legal challenges?
Senator, thank you for the question. And no, it is normal for us to do that when it comes to the tax code. You're sitting next to Chairman Wyden, who works with us on a regular basis on tax issues that are similar to this one. And outside of the IRA context, whenever you have a tax policy, we often will propose rules and allow taxpayers to rely on those proposed rules while we collect comments and finalize those rules. Our
What
goal
period-
being that we want to
I hate to
proposals.
interrupt you, sir. If you can just, what period of time do you concern proposed rules before acting on permanent rules? Right now, you're proposing till 2027 and beyond. We've never seen anything like this.
So we have a proposed rule out there for comment. And what we've asked for is that stakeholders like you provide us with comments that will then put us in a position to revise and provide a final rule as soon as possible. Our goal is to try and finalize these rules as quickly as possible to give taxpayers as much certainty as possible.
You can understand our concerns on this because basically you all filed for 2026, 2027, taking 2 or 3 years to get input before you make a final rule is going to put an awful lot of people who are making investments in our country in jeopardy if they base it off the way the bill was written. That's my concern, sir, and we've talked about this. We can go into more detail if we can. I want to go to Mr. Turk right now. Some U.S. automakers and battery producers have said there's just no way that we can make these EV batteries without China. And that makes no sense to me at all, since most of these technology was started here in America and then taken to China and other foreign countries of concern. So do you agree with some automakers that that's okay for U.S. tax credits to benefit these countries of concern such as China, whether it be Russia, whether it be North Korea, whether it be Iran, and others such as that we have no values with?
So I think we can absolutely do it without China. Just to give you a few numbers, we talked about the fact that graphite right now, the processing is 100% in China. Just from the investments, the tools that you've given us so far that we've used, right now our projections that 16% of the graphite that will be used in passenger vehicles in the U.S. by 2027 will be U.S. That goes from basically 0 to 16% just with the investments we made so far. And we've got a lot more grant funding. We've got a lot more loan
Why do you think that basically the numbers were cut in half, that these numbers were cut in half then? Why do you think they basically defied the law? Are you trying to accelerate because you think we can't do it quick enough, so you have to decelerate this to 20%?
Well, I think the way we look at it, and we work incredibly closely with our Treasury colleagues and other colleagues across the interagency, it's the tax incentives, but it's also the grant funding through the bipartisan infrastructure legislation. It's our loan program. The Defense Department has some funding as well to help on critical minerals that they're using for a graphite mine in Alaska right now. So it's all of these tools together, trying to get our percentages up as quickly as we can, understanding, as you mentioned in your opening and I mentioned in my opening, we have not had an active policy or tools in
Right.
our tool belt to do anything
Let me
about
say
this
one more
for
thing
so
on
many
this,
years.
if I can. My problem is this: the people that are making the investments, thinking this is what they have to hit, knowing now where the foreign competition come in unfairly and undercut them. That's where I think the lawsuits are going to come in, and it's going to be horrendous for us to be able to fight this and be uncertainty. Let me switch to something else also. I've spoken to you both about numerous times that concerns about misclassification of certain battery component production as critical minerals, processing rather than manufacturing. The difference between processing, sourcing and processing versus manufacturing. It's very clear. We wrote it very clear in the bill. But, so my question would be, why is there a discrepancy between the two definitions? Whoever wants to speak up.
I'll start, but I think what we did was we worked very closely with our partners at DOE to develop the definition, and we borrowed in large part from the definition that was in the bipartisan infrastructure law for several reasons. One being that we wanted to provide as much certainty as
We wrote in,
possible.
I'm so sorry, Secretary. We wrote specifically what the definition was in the bill, not the bipartisan infrastructure bill, in the IRA. And you all went back and used the language to basically, I guess, solidify what you wanted to do or how you wanted to do it, or how you wanted to basically let them morph together, because sourcing and sourcing and processing is a complete different than basically manufacturing. Okay, and the manufacturing is supposed to be in North America. $37.50 for one, $37.50 for the other. That's the problem.
This is our view. So, Senator, as I mentioned earlier, what we've done is we put out a proposed rule. Our goal is to take feedback from you and other stakeholders on that proposed rule. What I'm trying to explain is why we went with the proposal that we did, and our goal was to provide certainty to the marketplace by trying to make sure that we provided them with one definition of processing and manufacturing that was similar. We worked closely with our partners at DOE to develop that, but we look forward to taking your feedback and feedback from other stakeholders as we move from a proposed rule to a final rule.
Well, we're going to continue to work together to try to get back to the whole process and the definition written into the bill and not being basically interpreted differently. With that, we'll turn to Senator Barrasso.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Adiano, let me just continue. I understand under the IRA, the leased electric cars, and the chairman had agreed with me when I mentioned this earlier, are not subject to foreign source content requirements, to consumer income limits, or to vehicle price limits. Leased cars, is that correct?
So leased vehicles are treated differently than purchased
So I'm
vehicles,
correct.
Senator.
All right. So that means that somebody making over $1 million a year under this administration in your plan could lease a $100,000 electric car that contains lots of minerals from China and still benefit from a $7,500 tax credit. Do you believe that's a good use of taxpayer money?
Senator, that's not true over time. The way that the provision works for 45W is that it will come down as the cost of the vehicle comes down, making.
But it's true today. I don't hear it's not
very
true over
different.
time. Today it's true. Is that right? $100,000 car, somebody making $1 million a year still gets the credit, the tax credit.
Today, the lease vehicle credit is the same as the 30D credit. But Senator, what I was trying to explain was that the way that the bill was designed was to make the purchase credit more valuable in order to incentivize the domestication of the supply chain. That's why we're seeing the movement of the supply chain back to the United States and our allies, is because over time, our car companies like Ford and GM know that they're going to be
Well,
able to sell
the
vehicles
chairman of the
for
committee has
30D
made clear
credit.
that the way the bill was designed and the way that it's being implemented are very different right now. And this is one of these abusive areas that I think the American people say, hey, we're subsidizing very rich people who are liberal, who have these elitist views on the West Coast, are getting big payoffs because they're into this kind of thing when these cars don't work other places. Mr. Turk, you testified before the committee February of 2023. At the time, the chairman and I both raised concerns about the department's grant negotiations with Microvast, a China-based battery company. In response, the department did its homework, canceled its award negotiations with Microvast. It appears that the department has again failed to do its homework or even a quick Google search, for that matter, when last September the department finalized $3 billion loan guarantee with Sonova, a solar company. At the time, Sonova had an F rating, Mr. Turk, right here, this is the F rating Better Business Bureau, Sonova, $3 billion grant from the department. The Better Business Bureau actually has stripped Sonova of its accreditation. They're still not accredited. 2019, Sonova was found to be operating illegally after not fulfilling its duties to customers under Puerto Rican law. According to media reports, a Sonova salesman sold an elderly man a $60,000 solar system after the man told the salesman that he was in hospice and dying. That's how you get an F rating. The elderly man died soon after. Sonova then, what did they do? Oh, they placed a lien on his mobile home, which prevented his family from selling the property. A Texas woman said that her 80-year-old mother was blind, bedbound, partially deaf, on dialysis with congestive heart failure. So what did Sonova do? Oh, they sold that elderly woman a 25-year, $86,000 contract. That's how you get an F rating. The mother died 3 months later. These are but a small fraction of the deeply troubling complaints against this company, Sonova, a country that the Department of Energy has granted a $3 billion program to. Can I have your commitment that the department will go back, do its homework, and reconsider this flawed decision to award Sonova a $3 billion loan guarantee?
Well, thank you, Senator, for the question. Let me just say we're continuing to do our homework and make sure that we have improvements throughout our processes. You mentioned Microvast. We have put in place and we are improving and strengthening what we call our RTES, our Research, Technology, and Economic Security effort to take advantage of public information, intelligence information, expertise that we have at our department and our labs to make sure that we're doing the scrutiny that the public, the taxpayers deserve and demand. So we're continuing to improve that process. Our loan program, this is a program under our loan program. This is in conditional commitment right now, and so we are continuing to do our due diligence, continuing to do our homework. We are looking for ways to make sure that solar PV technology is accessible to everyone, including low-income folks. And that's what this loan is about. And we are using the leverage of this loan, all our due diligence, to make improvements to make sure that we have the highest standards going forward. So that's the process we're in right now with Sonova, with these discussions in the conditional commitment.
Well, it's been a finalized $3 billion loan guarantee already. I think you did the right thing with Microvast pulling back. Should have been done beforehand. Shouldn't need a committee here and a chairman and a ranking member pointing out how bad this company is before the administration goes back and says, well, maybe we shouldn't give them the $3 billion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have additional questions for a later
Absolutely, Senator.
time.
Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Adeyemo, as Congress intended, the Inflation Reduction Act incentives are dramatically accelerating the ongoing clean energy industrial revolution, I'll call it, and really supercharging manufacturing in a way that we haven't seen in 60 years. You shouldn't take my word for that, but I would ask unanimous consent to put a couple of articles in the record today, one from Forbes that says in 2023, and this is the headline, the United States started building again, thanks to Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. And another that from Axios, where the headline is, a manufacturing investment super cycle is starting. We've seen this in New Mexico with 3 different factory announcements in solar, in wind, in electric vehicle supply chains. And so we've already seen hundreds of thousands of jobs created in making batteries, solar panels, heat pumps, and other clean energy technologies here in the United States. So how would you characterize the manufacturing investment landscape both before and after the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act?
Well, Senator, thank you for the question. Thank you for your leadership with regard to the Inflation Reduction Act. And I think that you've done a good job of characterizing the sea change that we've seen in America due to what I'd say are the 3 historic pieces of legislation that Congress has passed: the CHIPS and Science Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and most importantly, the Inflation Reduction Act. And what it's done is that it has led to investment in America that is unlocking a manufacturing boom that spreads throughout the country, not only in your state, but throughout the country in a way that is, in lots of ways, giving people access to jobs that are well-paying jobs to build the economy of the future, and not just an economy that's going to matter here in America, but will allow America to be a leader around the world. Because ultimately, what we've learned over the last few years is the importance of the supply chains, and the investments we're making in building a supply chain that goes through America will both supply key goods and clean energy to America, improving our energy security, but it'll also mean that America is at the center of the alternative supply chain to China that our allies and partners can rely on. These investments will unlock our ability to make sure that America's economy doesn't just grow next year, but over the next decades, and that is because of the passage of legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act.
So when I was growing up, my mother worked in auto manufacturing. She worked at a wheel manufacturing plant. And I saw for years how policies and lack of policies really created enormous disinvestment in the United States. Auto manufacturing declined. And now we're seeing this incredible resurgence. The numbers are absolutely remarkable. The amount of investment here in the United States is remarkable. When you just look at the state of New Mexico, I can think of a 1,500-person announcement of a new solar manufacturing plant that's coming, a wind tower manufacturing plant that's getting up off the ground that's roughly 300 jobs, roughly the same size jobs at an auto manufacturing supplier for EVs. What happens to those factories, and more importantly, the people who are going to work in those factories, if we do what House Republicans have suggested and we repeal the Inflation Reduction Act?
So, Senator, what happens is those jobs go away. America's manufacturing boom goes away. The investments that are being made in America go away if we were to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. Not only does that happen, but it sets us back in not only meeting our climate goals, but improving our energy security. One of the most important things that was done in the Inflation Reduction Act was the passage of the prevailing wage and apprenticeship provision, which means that not only are we seeing a manufacturing boom in America, but the people who are helping to build those manufacturing plants are being paid a living wage because of the legislation that you've passed. So it is not only creating new jobs, it's creating well-paying jobs all over the country, which are going to be critical to making sure that Americans and communities all over the country have the ability to build opportunities for their family. And if you were to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, it would have a significant impact on those communities, on those individuals, and on our long-term economic success.
Secretary Turk, so if those jobs go away, does that make us more or less competitive with China?
Absolutely less competitive. We're competing, and I would say we're winning. I know in meetings I have with international counterparts, they're incredibly jealous of the tools we have in the tool belt, the private sector investment in particular. We're not doing industrial strategy like other countries. We're doing it in a uniquely U.S. way with entrepreneurs and companies leading the way. What we're able to do with these tools that you've given us, the tax tools, the grant tools, the loan tools, is accelerate that and have this all across our country in a very intentional way.
Mr. Chairman, I like winning. Let's do more.
Let me just say for clarity, the bill that we put together, and the reason I have so many problems with it, and it looks like I'm working with both sides, but the bottom line is that we put a bill together with Republican input for over 5 years that I've been talking and working with them. Because of reconciliation, they weren't able to vote for it. But we don't have to basically divide us any further by implementing something that we didn't pass, whether they voted for it or not. And our Republican colleagues are benefiting too, but they're as upset as I am that we're not following it. This is a great bill. Absolutely, make no bones about it. And we're all going to benefit from it. All we're asking for, Secretary Adeyemo, and to you, David, is to make sure we stay within the confines of how the bill was written. And don't bust a budget to where we're spending twice as much that we appropriated. CBO score was 680, 690, okay? That should stop when we hit that, and we've done some good things. Let's go back and reappropriate. That's the way it should have been done, and that's what we're concerned about. With that, we'll go to Senator Lee.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses. Mr. Turk, I'd like to start with you. Last spring, we as a committee heard from the CEO of North American Electric Reliability Corporation. His, of course, is the grid reliability watchdog. And we heard testimony that the U.S. faces a looming reliability crisis because of the premature retirement of coal-fired power plants. That message was pretty loud and clear as I heard it. We heard the exact same message from the FERC commissioners. And as my time is somewhat limited, I'd appreciate it here if you could give me a yes or no answer on this. Is our current grid infrastructure capable of supporting a massive increase in EV usage?
So that's why we're making investments in our grid to improve it and make sure we've got the grid that we Americans deserve.
So it's not, and we need to get there. But
So I'm quite confident with the tools that we have and building out. We're talking about EVs at this hearing. The fact that we're going to have a whole bunch more batteries out there, that we can determine when those batteries are charged, and especially if we get to bidirectional charge, that's actually going to be a more resilient grid if we incorporate that.
Now, California has a new regulation carrying the force of law in that state that by 2035 is going to require 100% of new vehicles sold to be electric, all of them, every single one of them. So under that rule, electricity demand is obviously going to skyrocket. One of Utah's largest coal plants, the IPP plant in Delta, currently sends about 80% of its generated power to California utilities. Sadly, that plant will soon be retired due to California's zero coal agenda. It seems that aside from coal and gas, there are currently no affordable, dispatchable, reliable alternatives to support the increased power demand from EVs at scale. Would you agree with that?
So I wouldn't. We're making investments, including through the incentives of the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, on battery storage and other storage options. We're focusing and doing an awful lot of research and development, demonstration and deployment on long-term storage. And I think an area that's not gotten as much attention is virtual power plants and smart demand response. We put out what we call a liftoff report, looking at how we get to balance the grids in an efficient, cost-effective way and a reliable way going forward. And a lot of that comes from balancing supply and demand, taking advantage of technologies, including all these new mobile batteries that are out there that will be out there in even greater scale as we get more EVs. That can be a grid enhancement opportunity if we do it right, and that's what we're working on.
But you don't disagree that we're losing reliable sources of affordable baseload power. We're not adding to the supply of reliable, consistent baseload power at the same rate, even as we're putting a lot more demands on the grid as we provide these incentives, and in some cases, most acutely in the case of California, the mandate about 100% electric vehicles by 2035.
So there's no doubt our electricity sector is changing. We're investing in a whole range of technologies, including in geothermal. If we can get enhanced geothermal at scale and at cost, that can be a huge part of our solution on generation. Small modular reactors on the nuclear side can be a part of it. Balancing the grids with supply and demand using these technologies. It's all part of the work that we're doing at the Department of Energy to make sure that all Americans have reliable electricity and affordable electricity.
Yeah. Look, I love the idea of small modular reactors. Love to see it. We've heard about them for years. Haven't seen deployment of them, but that's going to have to change if we keep heading in this direction. It seems like one of the only news sources that we can rely on as more and more other sources of reliable, affordable baseload power are taken off the grid. But, you know, we've got to be concerned about it. Now, the Biden administration makes the case for widespread EV adoption, and is an important function to have if we're going to go in that direction. Now, fossil fuels like coal, gas, and so forth power the mining and transportation of raw materials for electric vehicles, for the manufacturing of the components for electric vehicles, the transportation of the assembled electric vehicles, for the charging of the battery throughout the life of the electric vehicles, and for the eventual disposal of the electric vehicles. It'd be reckless and irresponsible to force Americans to purchase these vehicles, which are significantly more expensive on average than their internal combustion engine counterparts, and then leave them without a way of charging them. But it'd be reckless to do all that and not take into account the environmental impacts of all of those things. Do you have data that you track on the total environmental impact of these requirements and of the electric vehicles they produce? I mean, are we actually doing the environment a net favor?
So we're a very data-driven, science-oriented department with our national laboratories, and I completely agree with you. We should do a very rigorous environmental assessment of all the technologies. And I think one of the exciting parts of the tools that you all in Congress have given us is we've got incentives for hydro, we've got incentives for nuclear, including small modular reactors, we've got incentives for carbon capture, utilization, and storage to clean up existing assets. Transportation right now is our biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions, so we have to have solutions. We have to take that head on. And you mentioned the affordability. I think what's going on right now, and it's underappreciated by many, is EVs right now are becoming more and more affordable. Right now we've got a Chevy Bolt model out there that's under $20,000. That's incredible. J.D. Power actually, when you compare internal combustion and EVs, models for models, apples to apples, EVs are actually cheaper when you take into account the fueling and the maintenance, reduction in maintenance costs.
Right. Look, I'm out of time, but these are things we've got to look for. I'd love to see an analysis from you of the total environmental impact and of efforts you're taking to make sure that we don't have a significant lag between the added demand on the grid that we're creating and our actual supply of functioning affordable baseload power sources. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Pia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Have great news for everybody this morning, particularly my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who have expressed their concerns regarding our reliance on foreign critical minerals, specifically lithium, not just in today's hearing, but in recent years. Last month, DOE announced the results of the most comprehensive analysis to date quantifying the domestic lithium resources in California's Salton Sea region. This analysis, conducted by Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, found that with expected technology advances, the Salton Sea's regional total resources could produce more than 3,400 kilotons of lithium, enough to support over 375 million batteries for electric vehicles. The analysis confirms what we've long known in California. The Salton Sea region has significant potential as a domestic source of the critical minerals needed for these batteries. Question number one for Mr. Turk. What is DOE doing to support responsible development at the Salton Sea so that we can begin increasing our domestic supply of lithium?
Well, thank you, Senator, for mentioning this phenomenal asset that we have in our country in California, the Salton Sea. The analysis that you mentioned is really groundbreaking. Just to put in perspective, the 375 million batteries for electric vehicles, the Salton Sea itself, if we can get the costs to where they need to and make sure that we're doing this right from an environmental justice perspective, that's more than the total number of vehicles currently on U.S. roads, just to give you a sense of scale of this one asset, this one resource that we have. So we're working across the board throughout the Department of Energy, everything from reducing the cost of the technology to get this brine, to make sure it's done in the right way, and to make sure that this is available for our domestic processors, our manufacturers, and the whole supply chain going forward. We're using a loan program, we're using all the tools that we've got in the tool belt, and really appreciate the partnership with you, Senator, to make sure that we're connecting all those dots as quickly as we possibly can for economic benefit, but also decarbonization benefit as well.
Yeah. Well, let me also ask you, how important is it for this committee to support and incentivize geothermal energy research and development to not only provide a reliable source of power generation, but also to shore up our domestic supply of lithium and other critical minerals like zinc?
So I think geothermal is one of the most exciting technology and opportunities that we have out there. Most people think of geothermal in the traditional sense of geothermal. If you've got a hot spring nearby, you take advantage of that and you get some benefit from that. What's particularly exciting is something called enhanced geothermal, where you use drilling technology, and we've done an awful lot of drilling in our country and perfected a lot of technologies and reduced those costs. If we can train that drilling technology, and there are companies, and we're doing some things from the Department of Energy focused exactly on this, you drill deeper, you do it cheaply, and then you have electricity production because it's higher temperature coming up. So if we can get that technology at a cost level, that is 24/7 baseload power in a very environmentally responsible way without the carbon emissions. Incredibly exciting. We've got work to do. That's what we're doing, including through our Forge facility that's testing some of these technologies in the western part of the United States.
Yeah, but if we can pull this off, this would be massive. We already
Huge.
have a significant amount of quality geothermal energy, which we refer to in the renewable energy space as renewable gold, right?
Absolutely.
In my time remaining, I want to bring up another topic for the Deputy Secretary. The administration has laid out a goal of deploying 500,000 chargers by 2030. Effective implementation of Section 30C is critical to realizing this and broader climate goals. While more than half of all Americans say they're at least thinking about buying an EV, the lack of reliable charging infrastructure, particularly in rural areas, remains the number one limitation to the widespread adoption of electric vehicles. If we're able to meet our climate goals, Treasury must provide certainty around Section 30C requirements. Deputy Secretary Adeyemo, Senator Cortez Masto and I recently led a letter to Treasury on this issue. How does Treasury intend to leverage 30C to scale up investment in the decarbonization of the transportation sector?
Senator, getting this right is critical to building out the type of charging stations that will be necessary to support the electric vehicles that are becoming abundant throughout the country. We're committed to getting out guidance to states and local governments in the coming weeks, not months, in order to make sure that people have the information they need to make these investments, because we know they're critical to your communities. To pick up on your question to Deputy Secretary Turk, I recently visited the Torres Martinez tribe and saw the Salton Sea. And I think one of the things that your question reminds us all of is that some of the investments that can be made through the Inflation Reduction Act can transform communities that have often been left behind and left out for too long. That's why we're encouraged to see that the more than $200 billion of investments that have been made because of the Inflation Reduction Act have been made in communities that tend to be above the national average in terms of poverty and below the national average in terms of college education. But we know that in order for all of this to work, we need to build out an infrastructure, and 30C is critical to that. And we're committed to getting out guidance very soon so your constituents and constituents all over the country can take advantage of this tax credit.
So thank you very much. Yes, Salton Sea, Mr. Chair, is probably Exhibit A on multi-benefit, whether it's critical materials, water resilience and reliability, public health improvements in the area, quality job creation. I invite you to come visit.
I'd love to do it. I'll be there. Senator Hawley has graciously given up his spot for Senator Cassidy.
And I thank Senator Hawley. And I want all my colleagues to hear this. Senator Padilla, I will bet you, and I will offer you turtle soup from Commander's Palace if you get that facility in Salton Sea permitted within 2 years. I'm going to win that bet. Because part of the problem is we can't get permitting for this sort of activity, and the idea that Californians are going to kill a bunch of desert turtles, if they do, ship them to Commanders, and I'll make your soup for you. Okay? But I'm going to win that bet, brother.
We'll see about that.
Let's work together on improving that. And Mr. Turk, I always feel like you're straightforward with us. I appreciate that. You look a little older since you were first sworn in, but that's, part of being on the dark side. Listen, since we're talking about the Salton Sea, what about doing a DOE analysis of the Smackover Formation in Louisiana for lithium? It's in Arkansas. Louisiana actually has experience and embraces extraction, and that would be economic development for the same group that Senator Padilla spoke of, as well as the Secretary, for those who, frankly, could have some economic development. So I think we have some money in the bipartisan infrastructure bill for that. If y'all could explore that, that would be fantastic.
Happy to talk to you and happy to explore that. I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities out there. One of the things I'm most excited about, and thanks for the nice words as well, I do feel older, as my kids remind me of on a daily basis. We've got an effort in our Fossil Energy and Carbon Management Office to work on some analysis, do some real research with our labs on mine of the future. How can we take all the technology that we've learned over many, many years, apply it to extract responsibly in an environmental way and responsibly for the communities in which those mines are located, do it with a smaller footprint, I think it's incredibly exciting, but happy to look into the particular project that you mentioned.
That's great. Now, related not to this committee, but to what you just said, there is a DOE, and by the way, this will be a little bit off topic, but it's related to what you just said. There is, I'm told, a DOE review of LNG export facilities, a decision to unilaterally revise the climate criteria in terms of their approval, looking at life cycle emissions within the U.S., but ignoring the fact that if U.S. LNG replaces coal being burned in China or in Germany, that the positive benefits for global emissions is incredible. Incredible. Whatever increased life cycle emissions you find here in the U.S. by scrutinizing closely, it is overwhelmingly overwhelmed by replacing coal burning in other countries. Now, you just mentioned being driven by science. Would you agree with the statement I just made?
So as you know, Senator, and I know it's off topic, but happy to talk about this and happy to have a further conversation with you on our authorities for liquefied natural gas, LNG. It's a public interest determination. And so what we're required by Congress is to take into account national security, take into account economic implications, take into account environmental and climate change implications, and we should take into account the full life cycle, the emissions at the front end and the emissions on the back end, and do a really thorough analysis. And that's what we do every time we have an application come in.
But if the fact that the Department of Energy is unilaterally seeking to revise this, and when arguably it's in favor of our national security to help Europe wean off of Russian gas, it's improving the world's climate condition when we replace coal, which has, with natural gas having 50% more energy content relative to CO2 positions without the SOx and NOx and particulate matter. And it helps our economy by creating jobs for the American people, as well as an overall larger GDP for us all. I'm not sure where the impetus comes for this unilateral revision, except that the administration has had a pattern of doing whatever they can to slow walk LNG export facilities.
So let me say two things. One, we take applications as they come and review them thoroughly, as diligently and quickly as we possibly can. Each application is different. Some are easier, some are more challenging along those lines.
Now, that's different than what I'm describing.
And then secondly, I think we feel the responsibility for the public interest determination in everything we do to continuously update and improve our analysis to make sure we're taking into account all the factors that you mentioned, to make sure we're looking
I'm about out of time, but I'll just say that there is a paralysis by analysis. And when quite intuitively everything I said and quite demonstrably everything I just said is absolutely true, the fact that DOE is going to go through a multi-year process of redoing it once more suggests that the paralysis actually is the desired result of the analysis. And I'm not talking, I actually think you're a very reasonable person. I think this is being driven by the political arm. And that political arm is going to sacrifice U.S. national security, U.S. economic interests for the family and for the country, and climate reductions worldwide. With that, I yield.
Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's important to sort of set the context of this hearing. We're talking about all these various details of these programs, but why are we here? We're here because the overarching crisis is the climate. Just in the last 10 days, 2 massive storms on the East Coast have made an enormous impact and an enormous cost. I've seen it, and it's happening in my state, all along the coast, all along the eastern seaboard. There's just no question that this is the most significant problem that we face. And history will not judge us well if we don't confront it. And I believe the Inflation Reduction Act did confront it in very significant ways. Can we fix it? Can we improve it? Absolutely. Can we work on how it's being implemented? Absolutely. But what worries me is when we're talking about trying to undermine these various programs, I just wrote down, we are fiddling while the planet burns. We are fiddling while the planet burns. And people are going to look back and say, yes, you addressed it, but you didn't really address it with a sufficient sense of urgency. And I think we got to talk about the impact of the climate crisis on us. And if you don't want to talk about saving the environment, talk about saving taxpayer dollars to deal with these Stafford Act responses that we're going to have to be undertaking in the next few weeks. The other point I wanted to make is that batteries plus renewable is baseload power. Batteries plus renewables is baseload power. So this idea that you can only have baseload power from a plant that's running all the time, no. If you have renewables and if you have sufficient batteries, which the department is doing huge amounts of research on, and in fact, it's being deployed, I think that's a very important point. The other point is about, we've talked about electric vehicles. Clearly, we're talking about new products to the market in the last few years. The price will come down and has come down substantially. And I think this chart is very informative because what it shows is this is the cost of ownership of EVs versus gas vehicles. A whole bunch of different, everything from a Ford F-150, Hyundai, Kia, Volvo, Nissan, all the way Chevy, Malibu, and a Bolt. And what it shows is, and this includes the cost of buying the vehicle. So that's in this calculation, the financing cost. So what it shows is that half of these vehicles already are cheaper per month. More than half of these vehicles, the EV is cheaper per month, including the capital cost. So I think that's really significant. And this is an early snapshot. I'd venture to say that 5 years from now, it's going to be 90% of the EV vehicles are cheaper to operate. I have a plug-in hybrid. Yesterday, I put in my 5th tank of gas in 3 years. Just yesterday. My 5th tank of gas in 3 years. My total maintenance cost on that vehicle in 3 years has been $26 for one oil change. The advantage to the consumer of these vehicles is enormous, and if what these incentives do is increase the uptake of the vehicles, which in turn increases the scale of their production, which in turn will lower the cost of these vehicles to the public. So,
Senator, can I ask one question? Does that
Yes, sir.
include the credits, $7,500 credit? Are you based in that base price? So without the credits, because the credits are going to go away eventually.
yes. And I would say the credits are going to go away, and what's going to happen is that the scale of production, mass production, is going to lower the price. And in fact, that's already starting to happen. My plug-in hybrid Toyota Prius Prime is about the same price as a Toyota Camry today. And the cost of operation is significantly lower. The other piece about this is that I think we need to emphasize is what's happening as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. This is amazing. This is the expansion of battery manufacturing in the United States, largely as a result of this Inflation Reduction Act and the work of the department in terms of research. But what it shows is that this is EV demand. This is the projected growth, both announced, under construction, and fully commissioned, that shows this is the sort of dollars and cents, impact of the Inflation Reduction Act that is really making a great difference in U.S. manufacturing and jobs and in bringing the supply chain home. I've got 8 seconds left, Mr. Turk. If you could find a question in there somewhere, you're welcome to it.
So maybe make a few points. On the cost perspective and where we expect costs to go into the future, we've seen battery costs that goes into EVs, and that's a huge part of the cost going into an EV, decreased 90% since 2008. And when we look at where that's going in the future, we continue to see dramatic cost reductions. Again, that's a huge part of the EV cost. 48% additional reductions on top of that 90% reduction already going out to 2030. So that's another data point in terms of the trajectory of where we're headed going forward. The other nugget I'd throw out there is for those who are an EV owner, the average savings you have every year because of the lower cost of fueling and the less maintenance is $1,000 per year every year that you save because you have an EV.
Thank you, Senator. Finally, Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Turk, thank you for being here. Nice to see you again. Thanks to both of the witnesses for being here. I wanted to talk a little bit about who is really benefiting from this administration's climate agenda and from these draconian electric vehicle mandates. So, Mr. Turk, you've already alluded to this. I know you know the answer to these questions. Currently, one nation accounts for 60% of the world's electric vehicle production. That nation is?
China.
Yeah. One nation accounts for 76% of the world's lithium-ion battery production. That nation is?
China.
Yet your administration, this president's administration, the mandates that you put in place require that 2/3 of our new vehicle sales in just the next 8 years, 2/3 of them be electric vehicles. Your policies are driving us and our supply chains into the hands of our greatest geostrategic enemy, enriching them, enriching their government, while forcing Americans to pay for electric vehicles that on average cost $7,000 more on average than a traditional vehicle, are more expensive to repair and insure, require more frequent replacements of everything from tires to component parts. So, Mr. Turk, why is it good for the American worker that we force our supply chains to a country that's our greatest rival and adversary? And why is it good for the American consumer?
So this is exactly why we're using all the tools that Congress gave us to diversify our supply chains, from the mining piece and especially the processing piece, which is where China really has a stranglehold. So we're making significant progress on lithium, on graphite, you name it, the tools that you all have given us to diversify those supply chains and make sure that we're getting the benefits of that. Our U.S. workers are getting the benefits of that. Citizens in St. Louis, I mentioned in my opening statement some exciting investments that are going on in St. Louis. We want U.S. Workers to benefit from this supply chain in this revolution. And China is absolutely competing. China is going whole hog on EVs and the full supply chain of it. And they're going to compete and outcompete unless we're playing and pushing back and competing with them, which is what we're doing.
Here's what I don't understand then. Why is it, if that is the case, why is it that you are interpreting the administration's climate law, so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which I think, frankly, is bad enough on its own, but you're reinterpreting it now to allow the tax credits to flow to Chinese entities. So now U.S. tax dollars are literally subsidizing Chinese battery makers. Why would we want to do that? Why would we want to not only give our adversary our supply chains and our jobs, but pay them to take them from us? Why does that make any sense?
So I would argue, and certainly want to turn to my Deputy Secretary at Treasury, we are not doing that.
How are you not?
The fact that with the 30D tax credit, only 13 models qualify at this point. Now, we hope more diversification happens and more models qualify for that tax credit is a good data point that we take this very seriously, and we want to have these jobs in the U.S. But let me
wait. I just want to stay with you, Mr. Turk, just because my time is so limited, and this is an important part, and the chairman's brought this up, and I'm glad that he has. This is really, really important. The Inflation Reduction Act, which I did not vote for, but nevertheless, the Inflation Reduction Act said clearly that China, if you are a foreign entity of concern, which includes China, you don't get the taxpayer subsidy. You don't get the 30D subsidy. You don't get the tax break. And yet your rule allows Chinese companies to get the tax break. It loosens up the restrictions. So now we are subsidizing our rivals. I just don't understand. The chairman's asked you about this repeatedly. I don't understand why we would pay Chinese companies to outcompete us.
So I would strongly disagree with that. I spent a lot of time working with the team, and we worked hand in hand with our Treasury colleagues on the FEOC, the Foreign Entity of Concern, the FEOC standards, and happy to go through the three prongs of that in particular in terms of what our proposal is on the table.
Well, that's the problem, right? Is that the law, which again I didn't support, but the law says just no. It says no. And then you come back and say, it's what we lawyers like to call a multi-factor balancing test, which is usually what courts do when they want to get their way. So it's like, oh, well, let's complicate it. We've got all of these different things, and the effect of it is, this has been widely reported, this isn't my opinion, everybody understands that what it does is, it allows Chinese companies, so long as they're not set up within mainland China, but owned and controlled by China, they can now get the tax credit. I just don't understand why we would use our tax money to pay the Chinese to make these vehicles.
So we're not. Only 13 models, again, have qualified for that 30D tax credit. A lot of companies right now, automakers, are scrambling and they're working urgently to make sure that they don't have that.
If your rule had no effect, why would you change it? Why wouldn't you just leave the text of the IRA in place? Why wouldn't you, the flat bar?
All of this is implementing the legislation that's been passed, and happy again to get into the details. Certainly if
last thing I've got, because my time's expired, I know other senators are waiting to ask questions, but this is important, just about the effect on American workers. Just looking at the news reporting on this, if Ford CEO says that EVs are going to require 40% less labor to produce than traditional cars, as production is shifting to the United States, This labor on, for instance, batteries, EV batteries, is increasingly being done in factories that are co-owned at least by foreign entities, and the wages for workers who are usually not unionized are substantially less than the wages for workers in traditional cars. And you mentioned my state. In Wentzville, Missouri, for example, we have almost 4,000 workers in a GM plant there. That's just one plant in just one area of my state. Believe me, I'll take all the jobs you can give me. But I don't want those 3,000 workers to lose their jobs and to have another couple hundred created in some other state in a factory co-owned by a foreign company making half the wages. And that seems to be the trade-off that you're offering to American workers. That doesn't seem like a good trade-off to me. With that, I yield, Mr. Chairman. If you want to respond, Mr. Chair, go ahead, but I yield, Mr. Chairman.
I just reiterate the number of jobs, 136,000 jobs, thanks to these tools that you've given us, thanks to this president, all across the country, including in St. Louis, but all across the country. That's an incredible record, and there are incentives, as the chairman well knows, to make sure these are good-paying jobs that we have all across the country.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I thank both of you for being here and answering these questions. Let me start with Mr. Turk. As electric vehicle adoption rises, it clearly is going to save costs, reduce local pollution. It's going to help address climate change. Electric vehicles also create new opportunities to strengthen our electric grid, as you mentioned before, including vehicle-to-grid applications and the virtual power plants. How is the Department of Energy considering the role of electric vehicles in enhancing the reliability and resilience of the electric grid? You touched on this, but a little more specificity.
Well, thanks for your focus on this, Senator. I wish more people were focused on this. It's going to be a challenge, but there's a huge opportunity here if we do this right. First of all, transportation, as you know, is our largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. So if we're not going to take transportation emissions head on, we don't have a plan. And we do have a plan with this administration, thanks to the tools you and other senators have provided us on this. The fact that we are going to have so many new batteries out there as part of electric vehicles increasing, we're now at 10%, quadrupled during the course of this president's administration in terms of the number of vehicles, electric vehicles sold in our country, and that number will only increase. We're going to have all these batteries out there. That offers up an opportunity. It offers up an opportunity of when you time those batteries being recharged and time that when we have additional electricity coming in, so balance supply and demand. What's particularly exciting, and we explored this in what we call a liftoff report on virtual power plants, is if you can have the two-way charging, that is, you can actually, in times of need, take electricity from those millions of batteries out there across the U.S. when we need it the most to balance the grids. That is an incredibly cost-efficient, effective way to do things, again, if we do this right. And a lot of work we're doing at the department is exactly on that.
Right, and I appreciate the complexity of the challenge, but I also recognize and embrace the ultimate benefits. It does take me back to the 80s and the 90s when the federal government incentivized directional drilling, eventually hydraulic fracturing, the ways that we were able to enhance the recovery of natural gas at a cost-effective and highly efficient way. That was the federal government really investing to try and accelerate a transition, a transformation, which I think is what you guys are doing at this point. Mr. Adeyemo, I wanted to talk a little bit about the IRA, the successful implementation and the provisions such as the 45X, the Advanced Manufacturing Production Tax Credit. Obviously, you have to prioritize access to these credits. The recent guidance, the definition of costs incurred would exclude direct and indirect material costs. That means the companies working to build a domestic supply chain of critical minerals will not be able to access this crucial tax credit. I worry. I mean, with the race toward energy security against global competitors, how are we and what is Treasury doing to help support a domestic supply chain of these critical minerals? And is there an opportunity to support companies trying to build a domestic supply chain of critical minerals? Think of the Salton Sea via the IRA tax credits.
So, Senator, thank you for the question. And I think the 45X tax credit is probably one of the most successful pieces of the IRA because what it's doing is driving a manufacturing revolution here in the United States. You're right that ultimately we want to create incentives for not only the manufacturing, but also the mining. What we've done with 45X is we've set out a rule, but also asked a series of questions as to how we can do that. Ultimately, what we're trying to get at is making sure that people only get the 45X credit if they actually have value add that's being created. The thing we're trying to protect against is that people who buy minerals potentially from abroad would then get access to the credit, and that money would flow to companies that are outside the United States. So we've asked a series of questions within the proposed rule that will hopefully help stakeholders who are looking to mine and produce here in the United States, who are adding value, to be able to help us think about how we can design the rule in its final form to make sure that we're creating the right incentives. Ultimately, despite what Senator Hawley said, our goal here and what we've done is we've designed these rules in a way that it's incentivizing American companies. For example, 30D. 30D is helping Ford and GM be able to be in a position to not only compete with Chinese automakers but to win, not only here in the United States, but around the world. No Chinese automakers taking advantage of 30D. What we've seen to date is that the companies that are taking advantage of it are American companies who are using it to make the investments that they need to be able to build out the cars of the future, which are electric vehicles. And we hope that 45X will help reduce the cost of those batteries over time. But to your point, we want to make sure that they have access to the minerals that will go into those car batteries.
Right, and I appreciate that, and I think you're certainly working in the right direction and establishing those supply chains and making sure that, well, we know that the most efficient and the most environmentally friendly ways of getting minerals that happens in the United States and not as much in other parts of the world at this point. So there's a double benefit there. Anyway, thank you so much.
It's magnificent, Mr. Chairman. We're sitting here, and we have an administrator here, the Honorable Adiyama, and what does it say up there? Your battery is running low. That's the problem, Mr. Chairman.
Wally, we don't know if it's your battery or our battery. That's
the battery's running, and that's the problem.
I haven't yielded back to you guys yet. Wait a second.
I wanted to alert him to the situation.
Do we have any technician here can help us?
Mr. Turk, this is the issue. The battery's running low because you and Senator Lee talked about bi-directional charging. And I want you to clarify that, because do you mean utilities would be able to draw down a homeowner's electric car battery from their garage and drain it to help the grid someplace else? Because I'm a doctor, go to a lot of emergencies. What happens when an owner of an electric car has an emergency at 3 a.m., go into their garage, and they find out their electric car is out of juice because this gobbledygook word of bidirectional charging has drawn them down?
So first of all, it has to be consumer-driven, and consumers should be the ones to take advantage of their asset if they'd like to take advantage of their asset right now. What's being contemplated right now and what's actually being utilized right now is when the battery gets charged, right? If you can time when your battery gets charged to when you have lower electricity or higher electricity generation, that helps balance the supply and demand and helps save you money and do things in an efficient perspective. If consumers want to, and if we have the technology worked out to have the bidirectional charging, just as you suggest, consumers can make money off of the fact that they own a battery. Now, they would need to take into account exactly your situation, right? You'd need to do it in a smart way so that you don't have batteries too low that you can take advantage of it if you need to in emergency circumstances. And this is what we need to work through using the smart folks at our national labs and others who are the true experts in this area.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Interesting hearing. You know, I think we all recognize there is great value in electric vehicles, but I hope what you're taking away, Mr. Turk, is this recognition that you've got an administration that is approaching how we deal with this with one hand deliberately tied behind our back, and we're talking about the critical minerals that go into this. You know, I think the administration is saying the right thing about minerals. We like minerals. We recognize that they're necessary, but they're not so keen on the issue when it comes to domestic mining. And You know, I appreciate what you have shared, the exchange there with Senator Padilla about the great benefits. You know, we've identified this source of lithium, but it's about access. Because we can identify it, but if we don't permit it, if we don't allow for that access, if we don't help support it, and we're helping to support access elsewhere, and that's where I want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing going on right now. It seems like Department of Defense is really working with us on this, and I appreciate that. But it seems like the administration has taken this approach that it's anywhere but China, because we all know China, we got to move away for all the right reasons there. But then when it comes to a country like Mozambique that doesn't exactly have good labor standards, that doesn't exactly have good environmental standards, then it's all okay. So I want to talk to you about that. You have got the background when it comes to critical minerals. You demonstrated that with your work at IEA. It's great. We get that. Secretary Adeyemo, I don't have a question for you this morning. I do that you're going to get as a QFR, but I want to just take one brief second to thank you for closing the loophole that was allowing Russia to evade sanctions on our seafoods that is such an important part of our market. So thank you. You're making a difference there. You always have to remember to thank people when they're doing good things. So let's talk about my issue with what is going on with the fixation to get the resource from somewhere else other than here, because we don't really like the fact that when you mine, you have to dig a hole. And you look at what we're seeing going on with graphite, and you have mentioned a couple times in your testimony here today that we're going to see domestic graphite production increase 25-fold here. Projections show 16% of graphite in EVs will be produced in the U.S. That's great. I'm curious about what that timeline is on those assumptions, because, again, what we're seeing right now doesn't match up. The example that I want to share with the committee is right now, DOE has awarded more than $320 million to a processing plant in Louisiana. My friend Bill appreciates that. But they're getting their graphite from Mozambique. They got DOE is now, I don't know that you've actually done this, but I understand that you're considering another $300 million loan guarantee for that project, which means more graphite from Mozambique. USDFC has announced $150 million in financing to help expand this Balama mine, and it's this mine in a super unstable region in Mozambique. Unrest is significant. ISIS is active. Workers are paid so little. They went on extended strike last year. There's all kinds of bad news coming out of there. But you've got all that DOE is supporting for a mine in Mozambique to get the graphite to help Louisiana out here so we can process it here, so we can put that stamp that says Made in America, but it's sourced somewhere else. In the meantime, what we've seen to help the largest graphite find in North America, coming out of Alaska, Graphite 1, DOD is the only part of this administration that's made an award. We got $37.5 million to help Graphite 1 move along. So here's my dilemma. We are helping to support a foreign mine, ultimately benefiting 10 to 20 times more using U.S. taxpayer dollars than we're providing support to our largest known domestic source of graphite. So we know graphite is big. We know we've got a source. We've identified it. But we're not helping to facilitate that access. Instead, we're setting up support after support after support for Mozambique. I don't think that's right. I don't think that balance is right. So how can you tell me that the administration is really committed to domestic sourcing when we're not putting our resources there?
Well, thanks for the question, Senator. It's always good to see you. And let me start just with the scale of the challenge, just as you suggest. Right now, China absolutely dominates the graphite processing market, 100%. I mentioned the numbers earlier, and those are 2027 numbers with the investments we've made so far, and we need to do a lot more, and I'll get to that in a minute.
So by 2027, you
By
really think that we
2027,
are
with the investments we've made
25%
so far,
increase?
it's 16% of what we need for graphite with passenger vehicles. We'll be able to take care of ourselves in the U.S.
Natural graphite?
16% is not enough. That's the process piece of it with the inputs that come from it.
Right.
But 16% is not enough, right? We should do more than that, and completely agree
Well,
with you.
and you would agree that it's not just about where we process it, it's where we get the
Completely agree, and
stuff.
I was getting to that. The most secure place of any that we can get is here in the United States, right? Assuming you do it with the environmental standards, you do it in the way that works for the communities, the state in which it's located. I had a chance to get up to Alaska last year and had met
And we
with the
appreciate
Graphite
that,
One
yep.
leadership. I had a chance to actually see the actual site in which they're proposing to work. I came away quite impressed at what they're doing. I've had conversations with my counterparts over at the Defense Department. They are putting in money. I think it's about $37.5 million right now of Defense Production Act that
Right.
was given by Congress to help get that going. We're particularly excited, and we're trying to connect the dots with our loan program. We've got a second round of funding coming through our battery manufacturing grant program.
Can
as
I
well.
ask on
So
that?
I would absolutely love
Because
for
we're
domestic-
told, Mr. Turk, that what we are seeing or what we are hearing is that your mine project, the mine project itself, is not eligible for DOE's loan program. They're only going to consider non-mine infrastructure, not the mine itself. And then they talk about, well, if a pilot project has been completed. So how does this help
So this is what
an
we need-
operation like Graphite One?
Exactly, and happy to talk in depth
Okay.
with you and your staff on this and to work through it. We're trying to be as creative as possible with the tools and the authorities that we've got. There's one of our loan programs efforts right now in conditional commitment, $700 million for Rhyolite Ridge in Nevada with a domestic supply of lithium carbonate. Love to work forward. I've had conversations with the CEO of Graphite One. I know our loan program is having conversations. Again, the loan program takes applications as they come in. So we're more than happy to have conversations and try to figure out which of the tools that we have currently will work to develop.
So if I can just ask one clarification, and I know that we have another colleague here who's waiting, but can you confirm to me that the mine itself, the project itself, is actually eligible for DOE loan guarantees or DOE loans?
So happy to have a detailed conversation. We're trying to be creative. A lot of times it's the mining and the processing piece. The Rhyolite Ridge is an example of what we're able to do using our authorities. If there's any change in authorities we need, we'd be eager to work with you and the chairman to try to make sure that we have the tools that we can to be maximally helpful.
Well, and I think
we're going to need
I
a
think
lot
that we
of stuff
need
at
to do
scale.
that because when Chairman Manchin and I were working on those Title 17 loan guarantees, I think we knew what we wrote in. I think we knew that we explicitly wrote in provisions in this infrastructure law to include mining. And we didn't think that there was any wiggle room with it.
And the most
So-
secure source of these critical minerals is here in the U.S., and we should absolutely responsibly, in an environmental way, with the community's support and to speed up permitting. You mentioned permitting. The chairman's been working on permitting. You both have been working on permitting for years and years, eager to work on that, too, so we can play our part to try to accelerate.
Well, we have to do more with this. And what I'm taking away from this exchange is that you can't assure me that, in fact, the mine projects are actually eligible for the DOE loan. So if we do have to get creative, even though we think that we were pretty clear in the law itself, allow me to work with you, work with the chairman to get creative to do so, because you can't pass the red face test when you're putting 10 to 20 times more U.S. taxpayer dollars into mining projects in a place like Mozambique and telling places like Nevada, Alaska, West Virginia, that you might have the resource, but you're not eligible for that loan.
Happy to have further conversations. I've had great conversations with the CEO of Graphite One. I exchanged an email just earlier this week. Happy to follow up with real urgency here.
Good, I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cortez Masto.
Really?
I think.
Let me just say, first of all, thank you both for being here. This is I'm a big fan of both pieces of legislation, the bipartisan infrastructure package as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. It has been a benefit to Nevada, and I know you both know that. This chart shows literally not only to Nevada with the batteries and EVs and hybrid, and let me just say, hybrid vehicles are part of this. It's all across the country. It's not just blue states, it's red states, it's everywhere where we're creating jobs, we're bringing opportunities, we're bringing that supply chain back to the United States. I'm hoping, and let me just follow up, and I echo what my colleague from Alaska said, Senator Murkowski, we're starting at the extraction of the mining. That's key, part of all of this, the processing, the manufacturing. But this is a perfect example of, we're not putting the genie back in the bottle. This is not it. Not unless the way we implement the legislation and write the regs, or the way that we get in our own way and either refuse to implement new legislation or undo what we have done already. But here's why. This is so essential that we have to lead in this area. We have to develop our domestic manufacturing. We have to make sure that we are doing everything we can so that we don't repeat the mistakes of other critical technologies, that we don't want to cede ground on the global stage. We don't want to end up reliant on hostile nations. This is important for our national security. This is important for jobs. This is important to bring that supply chain back here. And by the way, the demand is out there. The demand is not going to change. So we might as well be flexible and create the new jobs that are going to become because of everything that we're doing here. Now, with that said, I do have some concerns about how the administration at times, our intent is put out in this legislation. I appreciate you're trying to figure out how to do the guidance, but at sometimes the left foot is not walking with the right foot. And it is hindering what we are trying to do here. One of the areas that we talked about was 45X. And so, Deputy Secretary Adeyemo, let me talk to you about that, because I understood what you said to Senator Hickenlooper. I'm not sure, I understand what your intent is and what you said, which sounded really good, but I know what I'm reading in the guidance. Let me just give you an example. The Nevada Battery Coalition noted that the guidance on 45X from Treasury states this: direct material costs, as defined in the statute, or indirect material costs as defined by statute, and any costs related to the extraction or acquisition of raw materials would not be taken into account as production costs. And it goes on to say the cost of acquiring the raw material used to produce the electrode active material, the cost of materials used for conversion, purification, or recycling of the raw material, and other material costs related to the production of the electrode active material would not be taken into account. That signifies to us that there are not being, the critical mineral processing is not being taken into account for this particular credit. And that's the concern we're all having. And so I guess I'm asking you, what you just said is not what this reads. And so as we look at implementation, and as an attorneys look at this, and everybody looks at implementing it, it's a little different. So how do we fix this, or how do we address this?
Senator, thank you for the question, and thank you for the support. And I know we've had conversations about the IRA that have been helpful in helping us think through the next steps we take. As you know, what we've put out for 45X is a notice of proposed rulemaking. What that means is that ultimately we've put out the guidance in order to get feedback from stakeholders and industry in terms of how we improve and make changes as we move towards finalization. As I said previously, our goal is to make sure that we're giving the credit for value-added activities within the process. One of the challenges we want to stay away from is making sure that both the credit doesn't go to, for example, minerals or things that are processed abroad and brought into the United States, or that they're given to companies that aren't actually adding value. Ultimately, if stakeholders feel that we've gotten this wrong in terms of the way that we've defined value in terms of 45X, we look forward to that feedback. We actually encourage it. We ask a number of questions within the rule to help us better refine this in order to make sure that
I don't mean to interrupt you because I only have so much time here. Let me ask you this, but based on what you're telling me, there's going to be more bureaucracy. When somebody goes to apply for this, they're going to have to ask you're going to ask them several questions, including how this production and the raw material, where it came from. And if you guys aren't satisfied that it came from a certain company or within the United States, they're not going to get it. Is that correct?
No, Senator, I apologize. What I was saying was that within the guidance that we put out, which was a proposed rule, we asked a number of questions that will help inform the final rule that we'll put out. We're attempting to provide as much clarity for industry as possible, and our goal is to put out a final rule that addresses the types of questions that you've raised here. So I look forward to following up with you and talking to stakeholders in your state about this issue so it can inform the final rule that we put out that will provide more clarity to stakeholders.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I know my time is up. I have to thank both of you. It's not an easy task. These are pieces of legislation that we have passed are game changers for our future. It's not just 2 years, 5 years. It's 10 years down the road. It is changing our energy infrastructure moving forward. It is bringing jobs back. Nevada's proof of it. It is creating, and it's a positive for our economy and revenues in our states. And yes, it addresses our national security. We do not want to be reliant on other countries. So this is key, and it requires us all to work together to make sure we're, at the end of the day, the administration and how we implement it is having a positive impact. And I'll go back to what Senator Angus King said, with the ultimate goal of addressing the climate crisis that we're dealing with. So thank you. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Senator. I have one quick question. I think Senator Hawley has a second question also. So I'll go with mine. Wally, this is for you, okay? When the Congressional Budget Office scored the Inflation Reduction Act in August of 2022, they said the total cost of the consumer EV credit would be about $7.5 billion. Yet in fiscal year 2024, we would spend roughly $451 million on the credit. Recently, your agency announced that so far, 272,000 vehicles have been produced and could be eligible for the consumer EV credit in 2024 by itself. If they get the full credit of $7,500, if they would qualify, that'd be $2 billion just in 1 year. If they only got half of it, they'd get $1 billion. You'll run out of money in 3.5 to 4 years, what was based on CBO scoring. So blowing past the score that was demonstrated, I don't know what's intended, that you should amend your proposals to match the letter of the law, basically staying within the confines of the money that we basically allotted for the entire bill, especially the way the CBO was scored. I don't know what your thoughts would be on that, how you've looked at that.
Senator, thank you for that question. While we haven't talked about it, I do think that one of the most important things we did in the Inflation Reduction Act was raise additional revenue. And the biggest source of that additional revenue was, of course, the IRS, where you provided $80 billion of resources. And my view is we're actually going to raise more revenues through the Inflation Reduction Act than CBO scored, largely because they undervalued the technology investments that we're making at the IRS that are leading to additional revenue. We've seen already revenue come in from millionaires and billionaires who have previously not paid taxes. The IRS has already made these investments, and we think that will lead to additional deficit reduction over time. With regard to the EV tax credit, ultimately the way that I think about this is people only get the tax credit if they want to buy an electric vehicle. Ultimately, what this is going to mean is that it's going to mean that there's going to be more demand for electric vehicles. That means that it's going to create more jobs producing those electric vehicles, which will lead to additional revenues for taxpayers as well. I can't tell you exactly how much money is going to be spent here in terms of the electric vehicle tax credit. That's going to be a factor of what happens with regard to demand from American consumers, and also to a degree what happens in terms of cost over time. And I think the 45X credit is going to bring down cost dramatically because of what it does to batteries. But what I can tell you we're committed to doing is working with you and other senators as we move from proposed rules to final rules to take into account your feedback and making sure that we do what our shared goal is, which is to make sure that we build a supply chain in the United States that supports electric vehicles and energy security here and for our allies and partners going forward.
My only comment would be that our intention was to stay within the CBO scoring of how we paid for it, so it would not add to our deficit. As you know, we're over $34 trillion and continue to grow in deficit. And in saying that I believe I would recommend to every one of my colleagues, Republicans, Democrats, that if you want to stop the deficit spending that we're doing, then every piece of legislation should be based around CBO scoring that the ability to have spending authority. So I'll give you an example. A bill that's based on 10 years of pay-fors and has 10-year spending authority, the spending authority should stop immediately when the CBO score is hit. If it's hit at 3 years, and we thought it should be 10, then we should stop it there. That would stop all deficit spending. That's the biggest problem that Democrats and Republicans have had for the last decade or more. So if you want to know how it's grown the debt as quickly as we have, we underestimated, we overestimated, we've never corrected. We allow you to spend for 10 years, even though you run out of money in 3. That means it's deficit spending, we borrow. That has to stop. That's my recommendation as my final year is wrapping up here in the Senate, that if you want to get us back on track financially, that would help us. Because something that's so popular, we've had this discussion before, when it's this popular and people are demanding it, I'll guarantee you, and we're all benefiting, Democrats and Republicans, will come back and find additional ways to extend to appropriations in different bills. But you can't continue to do what we're doing, playing a shell game. That's my input, Secretary, and I appreciate it. And you and I have had some good, frank discussions. I would hope that you would really look into this as seriously as possible and follow the guidelines of the bill. That's our intent. With that, Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Turk, I just want to come back quickly to this question about workers, because I just think it's so important. You know, my friends on the other side of the aisle said that they believe that the overriding crisis is the climate. I just respectfully disagree with that. I think the overriding crisis we're facing is the wages and jobs of American workers. And it truly is a crisis for many, many American families who, you know, both spouses have to work, even when they both work. I'll just tell you a story about in Wentzville, Missouri, recently the UAW strike. I was out on the picket line, and I was listening to one of the workers there who is my age. I'm 44. He's my age, so he's not a young man anymore. And he was telling me that he has to, even working full-time and working overtime, he can hardly afford. In fact, he said it takes him 2 paychecks to be able to pay for his rent in Wentzville, Missouri. You know, this isn't Manhattan. This isn't New York City. You know, this is Wentzville, Missouri. This is an affordable place. That's the crisis we're facing. So in light of that, tell me why this is a good thing. This is from an article in Axios. I just want to quote, even as battery cell production shifts to the United States, that labor will likely be done by non-union workers at factories co-owned by foreign companies. And they, meaning the workers, will make less money than workers at traditional powertrain factories. The article goes on. For example, battery cell factories under construction in Kentucky and Tennessee are co-owned by Ford and a Korean company. They are starting their workers at, on average, $14 an hour less. $14 an hour less than workers who are making engines and transmissions for traditional vehicles. How is that good for American workers?
So let me start with a thanks for focusing on this issue. One of the reasons I got into the government and took this job is I grew up in Illinois, right next to Missouri, although the northwest corner of the state. I was just back visiting with my folks over the holidays. Rock Falls is the name of the hometown, and it's a steel mill community. We've had those in West Virginia and other parts of the country as well. And when I was growing up, the steel mill was basically shutting down my entire childhood. So I got to see very directly what that means to a community, right? The dysfunction that causes in families, the fact that parents can't provide for their kids, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is near and dear to my heart. I'm honored to work for Secretary Granholm, who was governor of Michigan, who has real life experience in terms of the changes happening in the auto industry and how we can be smart working together and proactive to make sure we've got jobs for folks, high quality, high paying jobs. I also think we're smart enough in the U.S. I think we're exceptional, and we can have those high quality jobs. We can make sure we've got affordability for our consumers, and we can make sure we tackle climate change as well. Transportation is the largest source of our emissions in our country, and we need to take that head on.
But I appreciate that answer, Mr. Turk, but you haven't really answered my question. I mean, let me read to you from another article. This is the Associated Press, and this isn't quoting someone. This is just a statement of fact. And I quote, if electric vehicles replace gas-powered ones, most UAW workers, for example, at engine and transmission plants, will lose their jobs. And if lower-paying battery plants aren't union, workers won't have anywhere near the same wages and benefits. So here, my nightmare scenario is that we repeat, because of this administration's climate agenda, climate fixation, I would argue, we repeat and hypercharge the loss of industry we saw in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and we do it all over again. And so the remaining few things that we actually produce in this country, like automobiles, we won't produce anymore. And we may produce a few things, but even those will be co-owned with foreign companies. I mean, you mentioned steel. U.S. Steel, an iconic American company, backbone of our steel production in this country, is apparently about to sell to a foreign company. I hope your administration is going to block that sale. I've urged the president to block it. He should absolutely block it. But for heaven's sake, let's not see what remains of our proud and strong auto industry be completely co-opted by foreign governments, foreign entities, and U.S. workers are left with very little. I mean, that's just a nightmare scenario. Wouldn't you agree?
So I'm a firm believer in playing offense. And I think we're playing offense right now. I think we're being intentional. We're being aggressive. We're being purposeful. The fact that we have 136,000 new jobs.
I don't think giving
across the
tax
country,
subsidies to Chinese companies is
including
playing offense, Mr. Turk.
250 new jobs in Missouri because of these investments, because of these targeted, directed investments, planning for the future and making sure we're winning and competing against China. China is working incredibly aggressively to dominate.
And your administration is helping them now by giving them these tax subsidies. And we are losing thousands of jobs because of your climate mandates that are forcing our production overseas and gutting our workforce. I don't understand it.
Everything we're doing in this space, and happy to go chapter and verse on all the provisions that we're working on, is to reshore, to make sure that these jobs, to make sure this economic opportunity is U.S. and our allies across the world. We've got a huge economic opportunity here. And the last thing we need to do is sit by idly like what we've done in our country for too long. We're stepping up. We're playing offense. We're winning right now. My biggest fear is that someone puts a brake on it and we're not able to compete. Right now we're competing and we're starting to win.
My biggest fear is that the Wall Street banks, they make a bunch of money on it because they've all invested in these foreign companies. And the foreign companies make a bunch of money on it. And we lose thousands of American jobs and American workers get their pay cut in half. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for indulging me.
Thank you. Let me just first of all thank both of you. Secretary Adeyemo, thank you for, I know that you're not up to par right now with the COVID, but we look forward to seeing you back in good health soon. And Dave, it's always good to have you here. It was very helpful. I think you know our concerns and our frustrations to a certain extent, but we all do, I mean, I say most of us recognize that the Inflation Reduction Act has tremendous impact on the economy of the United States of America and has taken us through a situation that could have been dire with inflation and recessions and unemployment, that we prevented that from happening. If we can just get to more of the agreements and get our the proposed rules versus permanent rules would be very helpful. I think it'd be clarity, a lot of clarity for our investments that are being made and people want to make. So I'm asking you all to work with us on that as close as you possibly can. Members are going to have until the close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions. And with that, meeting's adjourned. Thank you both.